Krishna speaks, and then
we look at some of the verses relating to death from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna speaks about it in different ways. The first time he talks about death in general is in chapter 2. He says in text 13, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this whole Bhagavad Gita was spoken because of Arjuna having to deal with so much death and inflict that on people. So Arjuna is also dealing with this problem of death, the beginning of Gita, and Krishna is
he's actually standing on the battle of, like, he's standing in this battleground, which is really
ocean of death,
surrounded by that, and that's actually what gets him going. Like, he starts asking these questions because he's overwhelmed, just projecting how many people are going to die and how his loved ones are going to die. And that's something that we all encounter as we stand at, different vantage points in our life. We think about, okay, what would my life be if, this person that I'm so close to, that person who's, so dear to me leaves or departs, what am I going to do? Or what happens when I die for it? So all of that is all, related to this idea of losing.
And without contemplating on this topic of death, we are not able to find our dharma. Just like Arjuna, he was not able to find his dharma because he was just thinking about how he's going to be happy in this life. That was his focus. And as a result, he lost meaning and purpose in his life. Similarly, when we don't contemplate on this topic enough, our life kind of stays kind of aimless, goalless.
Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. So again, Krishna speaking about how the material body is sure to die. We say as sure as death, but there is another, self, which is the real self or the essential self. There is no change. There's no death for that, for the soul.
So it's contrasting death with eternality, immortality. That what is death and then what is not death.
And I guess our struggle is because we are looking for that eternality in the non-existent.
And I guess that pervades into other aspects of our life where we don't want things to change. We want things to stay the way. And any kind of change or loss, it's hard to deal with because we are not kind of used to this concept of change. Text 27. One who has taken his birth is sure to die, and after death, one is sure to take birth again. Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. I guess through this, And I was just saying that understanding death doesn't mean that we give up, or accepting death doesn't mean that we have to give up our discharge of our duty. That's what Krishna is telling Arjuna. Rather, it refines our sense of duty when we are pressed with these questions of birth and death.
That's a very good point, actually. That sometimes somebody might say, well, we become so morose, thinking that what's the point of it all, that we may actually even not want to discharge our duty, thinking them to be temporary. But here, what you're saying is that, in fact, when we understand that, then we actually execute our dharma with greater enthusiasm. This is a really nice one. Chapter 4, text 5. The personality of Godhead said, many, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. So this is actually another way that Prabhupada defines death as forgetfulness. Death is actually forgetfulness of all our past bodies. So, as a tiny living entity, we forget. And in fact, we forget even when we go to sleep at night, that we have a body, or that we are, where we are. We wake up and then we suddenly realize, oh, I'm actually in this place, and this is, who I am. So this death is actually, so that forgetfulness is only for a night, but death, as we understand it, is actually,
And I guess any kind of forgetfulness means there is some death involved. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode. So Krishna is kind of providing a way out of this situation of death is by understanding our transcendental nature, Krishna's transcendental nature. Chapter 7, text 29. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in my devotional service. They're actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activity. Arjuna asked this question in chapter 7, that how can I overcome death? And so Krishna is kind of answering that there. Chapter 8 is all about leaving this body. This is a chapter that is recited. Chapter 2 and chapter 8 are recited when anybody leaves their body to bring comfort and bring focus. So in chapter 8, Krishna is talking about in what consciousness we should leave body, or what are the consequences of leaving a body in a certain consciousness.
So text 5 says, and whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, once attains me, of this there is no doubt. So, and then I guess let's also read the next one because it's connected. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So this is the great science of dying, where in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks that our consciousness determines our destination. At the time of death, whatever consciousness we have, the soul will be carried to that destination. And so if one remembers, whatever one is attached to, it'll, one will find oneself. So the whole process of bhakti is to refine that consciousness so that at the time of dying, we can actually remember Krishna.
One who at the time of death fixes his life here between the eyebrows and by the strength of yoga with an undeviating mind engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord in full devotion will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in this particular section, Krishna is talking about how the yogis give up this world. The conclusion of all yoga practices is to reach this point where one can remember the Supreme at the time of death.
At the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest from the unmanifest state, and thereafter when the night falls, they are merged into the unmanifest again.
So these verses are kind of describing how we are going through birth and death repeatedly. No matter where we are in this material world, there is no escape from death, even up to the planet of Brahma, which is the highest planet. And Krishna says that we'll keep coming back and going again, but rather you should shoot for something which is eternal.
I think we can skip to chapter 9. No, chapter 10 is good.
So in chapter so we may wonder what is death. So Krishna is kind of revealing that in text 9:19. Oh, Arjuna, I give heed and I withhold and send for the rain. I'm immortality and I'm also death personified. Very interesting. Krishna is contrasting. So Krishna appears as death, and therefore nobody can defy that, no matter how hard we try. We will see in some of our videos how as humans, we are trying to defy death through technology and through scientific advancement, but who can compete with the Supreme as he appears as death?
So chapter 10, text 34, it says, he says, I'm all devouring death and I'm the generating principle of all that is yet to be. So again, same thing being repeated that, I think we can.
Yes, please. And in chapter 13, this is a section where Krishna actually defines what is knowledge, what is true knowledge. So he gives many different points about knowledge: humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance. And then he says the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So Krishna is saying, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. Darshanam means one should contemplate, deeply think about these topics: birth, death, old age, and disease. In today's civilization, we are just concerned about comfort and how we can make our life more and more comfortable. But hardly there is a discussion about these topics. Birth, what is birth? Why am I born? What's going to happen after I die? What is death? So these, and old age and disease, they are tucked away. Nobody should see old age and disease. So therefore, we are not able to really find the true purpose and meaning in life because we are not engaging with these 4 topics. And Krishna says engaging with them is real knowledge. And here in chapter 14, Krishna is describing different destinations. What happens when we die in a certain mode of our consciousness? When one dies in the mode of goodness, he attains to the pure higher planets of the great sages.
When one dies in the mode of passion, he takes birth among those engaged in fruitive activities. And when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom. So different, and I guess we'll unpack this more in our presentation. But yeah, the idea being again that our consciousness determines the particular body that we are going to receive.
So it's not a random process. At the same time, we have control because of our actions. In chapter 15, Krishna again says, the foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of modes of nature. So training our eyes to see this journey of every living entity is very important. So,
and actually that's what we are doing by our study of the Bhagavad Gita. We are actually getting trained. And the most amazing thing about having this knowledge is that, you know, one will actually become empowered to actually, of course, go through one's own departure, but also assist so many others as they make their departure. Like I just lost my father like just slightly over a year back. And it was amazing that all of this knowledge actually suddenly just became completely manifest, and one could actually, you know, serve and be of some real service to someone else leaving, right? Your near and dear ones leaving. So,
and I guess the whole gamut of bhakti literature, Vedic literature is given to us so that we can conquer death. When I was growing up, we used to sing this prayer in our school every day, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, which means walk away from darkness to light. Mityurma Amritam Gamaya, that rising above death to achieve immortality. What is the right way to achieve that immortality is not through or technological advancement, but through spiritual advancement. So today's topic, I will go through our presentation, unpack some of these things that Krishna is saying. Session 5, death and grief, we'll touch upon that. In the last session, we talked about karma, different kinds of karma, different categories of karma, how to become free from karma, what is free will, interplay between karma, destiny, and free will. And death and karma, they are kind of very intimately connected because karma is
the driver.
Yeah, karma is the driver which causes us to be born again.
I think we talked about the definition of karma is that which generates future bodies.
Yes.
And so both good karma and bad karma forces us to come back into the next life. So birth, as soon as there's birth, there is death.
Everything that is born will die.
So this is our session 5, and we're going to talk about what is death, you know, and then we're going to talk about preparing for it, the art of dying. And then this is a very important concept of die before dying. What does it mean really to prepare our consciousness so that way when it's time for us to leave, you know, we can leave without any pain. By the way, you know, this is a little intense, but our bhakti text described that, you know, the process of dying is like the stinging of 10,000 scorpions. But that's only because one is not prepared. It's not physical pain, it's the emotional pain. And so the process of, you know, bhakti allows us to actually be so prepared that, you know, then it's just a change of clothes. That destination, I think. Okay. So this is a story which many of you might have actually even heard of Buddha and this lady who had just lost her son, and she was obviously in a state of great grief. And so she went to Buddha and said, you know, could you please bring him back to life? And so Buddha said, yes, I'll do that. But first you must go, you know, beg, you know, in the village and find me a handful of mustard seed. But, you know, it has to be from a house where no one has actually experienced death. And so then she goes around in the village, and obviously everyone says, well, you know, my father passed away, this person passed away. So she couldn't find a single household where someone had not died. And then through that, she comes back to Buddha with a deeper understanding and realization that actually death is inevitable and that it's impossible to find even a single household where someone has not died. And so, you know, her grief is somewhat dissipated through this understanding.
And I guess also getting this understanding that I'm not here forever. And therefore molding our life in such a way to get the maximum benefit out of this bad bargain
Mhm.
of the situation we are in.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we can move on. So this was another, Prabhupada is known for his quick comebacks. And one time a journalist asked Prabhupada that, Swamiji, we've heard that the death rate in India is very high. So Prabhupada retorted by saying that the death rate is the same everywhere. It is 100%. So, the point being that, yeah, it is inevitable. We can try and use different technological, things to maybe delay it. Maybe even, nowadays we have all these technology that allows us to stay, even on an artificial, ventilators. But the point is that it's something that can be absolutely not avoided.
And this was a question that was asked to Socrates, that how do you really know that a person lived a happy life? And he responded after thinking that you can find out how a person lived happily is by how he he died. Only through the death of a person we can know what kind of life they lived, actually.
So this is the unfortunate reality of our modern culture, is that we shy away from death. We tuck it away, and we don't want to see old age. We don't want to see death, and that's the reason why we lose so much. And I guess this is what Stephen Jenkinson is talking about here, that when we don't acknowledge death, we actually also don't acknowledge life.
Yeah, and that's what Krishna is saying in that verse, that we should ponder about, think about birth, death, old age, and disease. Well, these are the four things actually everybody is trying to circumvent or overcome. Even in our modern civilization, we are trying to overcome these four things, but without talking about them.
Right. Trying to conquer over them.
Your death, it doesn't mean you any harm. It's the most faithful companion you'll ever have. The inability to die is one of the things that calls our humanity into deep disrepair. Death-phobic in the extreme. Your dying is your life, and your refusal to know that is not life-affirming. It's life-betraying. The great consequence of refusing to die well is the corruption of the capacity that others can grow by virtue of attending to your dying. What will their understanding be of dying then? You'll have another generation with a grudge and a grievance against the natural order of things. In a culture that does not believe in endings, how do they solve heartbreak? Answer is less heart.
So, as he's saying, and saying it really well, that unless and until we, I guess I particularly liked what he said about when others attend to a person dying, with such dignity and with such spiritual consciousness, it leaves a permanent impression. It's a permanent gift we give to the world.
Yeah, I know. Growing up, we would see that in India, whenever somebody would die, then their body would be put on a stretcher, and it will be like taken through the town, and everybody will be loudly chanting names of God while the body. So we would often rush to the window or door to see who has left. And that would remind, just the procession would remind us that, hey, this is my ending too. One day I'm also going to be taken like this on the streets and to the cremation ground. And then part of living was to see other people die.
Right. And that is, and apart from that also, like, just the act of seeing people, like die so graciously, like I remember I saw your grandmother pass away, and she was, she was deeply spiritual. And so, or I just saw my father pass away. And because when you have the spiritual understanding, then the departure is not, it's a very peaceful and a very spiritually realized departure, where there is no fear, there is great peace, there is great remembrance, a great attempt to take shelter of the supreme divine. And so those departures, they leave a permanent impression on the next generation, and we remember them.
And I guess how you start preparing, like in the Vedic civilization, the life is kind of organized in such a way that for the last few years of your life, last quarter of your life, a person dedicates completely to prepare leaving. In absence of that, what happens? If there's so much fear about death, then you may tend to, okay, let me squeeze the most enjoyment out of life before I die. And that really corrupts the consciousness, because then you don't have the capacity to enjoy, but then you're trying to squeeze out.
Right. And then it generates a lot more fear and frustration because the body is not cooperating, the universe is not cooperating, and I'm trying to push through that instead of, gracefully accepting it. And so, let's see.
And that's why the sedation of the antidepressants. Where is it written that the best dying is the one you don't notice?
So I guess this not thinking about that, I guess the nature of the soul is to be immortal, but the nature of the body is not, is to die, is to wither away. So there's nothing wrong in trying to aspire for immortality, but trying to aspire for immortality of the body is kind of a foolish attempt. And I guess that's, we want to be immortal, and then these are different attempts that people are thinking that, okay, maybe I can be immortal through technology and through science.
Picture a society where 66 is the new 16, where your lifespan is double, even triple what it is now. A world where you could watch science fiction become reality, where your body will never fail you, a world where age really is just a number. Labs all over the world are working to get to the bottom of longevity, unlocking the secrets to extending our lifespans well into our hundreds.
So I guess this is the attempt to...
It's the greatest unsolved problem in biology.
So how close are we to...
So anyways, there's a lot of studies, a lot of research being done in this field of longevity, where, scientists are saying, how do we, live forever? And of course, there are, it's not a new thing.
It's not a new thing.
Yeah, even back in the day, there are stories of, these great kings, or, they wanted to somehow, make their body immortal. In fact, there's one particular story of this, Hiranyakashipu, who actually performed great austerities. And he finally, Lord Brahma appears to him and he says, what do you want? And he says, make me immortal. And he says, it's not possible. Even I'm not immortal. How can I make you immortal? So then he tries to circumvent that. He says, all right, if you can't make me immortal, then make me such that I'm not killed during the day or the night. I'm not killed by any weapon.
Not killed by human, not killed by animal.
Not killed by human, not killed by animal, not killed in the sky, not killed on the earth. So he thinks he has covered all the bases and that he's going to be now, immortal. But, anyways, the story, we can't get into it right now. But the point is that he does not. There's always, there's another way. Finally,
Krishna, as he says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am death. So Krishna appears in a specific form at a specific time, in a specific way. He kills this great demon Hiranyakashipu.
Because once he gets that boon, he becomes incorrigible, like impossible to, he just tortures people because he thinks that.
And that's another good point, that if our body would actually become immortal, then what kind of person I would become? We can see that in the life of this it becomes, okay, nobody can define me, I can do whatever I want, and then and there is no consequences. So is it right to pursue immortality of the body? That is a question. Or is it better to pursue our real immortal nature while living the limited lifespan that we have? So I guess the same thing is ultra rich are trying to live forever, and there's so many stories like that. You can watch this video later on your own. And there have been so many immortals that have tried to, people who try to live forever. This politician, Leonard Jones, he actually convinced, he was very good at convincing people, and he actually convinced everybody that he was immortal. And he got some votes and everything, but I mean, he eventually died at age 72. Qin Shi Huang, who was a famous Chinese emperor who built the Great Wall of China and the famous terracotta army. And all of that, the terracotta army was actually created by him so that he could live forever. And he drank a whole bunch of mercury one day, believing that would make him immortal. But as a result of that, he died a terrible death. So anyways, immortals. The quest for immortality has always been there in different ways at different times. And at the same time, you'll see there is a quest for immortality in the Vedas, like Maharaj King Parikshit, the grandson of Arjuna. And one can achieve immortality through the right means. The quest is not bad.
The quest is not bad, yes. I mean, it's what we are trying to immortalize, the body or the self, which is anyways immortal. So this is an interesting, just a little something interesting. There's a chapel of the bones. Where is it?
In Portugal.
Portugal, right? And it's really fascinating that how they've created a whole chapel with just bones, just
And
as an
skulls.
yeah, and just skulls. Can you just let her know that I'll call her later?
Class going on. I don't know.
So this is a poem that's actually written at the door of this chapel. It says, "Where are you going in such a hurry, traveler? Stop, do not proceed. You have no greater concern than this one that on which you focus your sight.
Recall how many have passed from this world. Reflect on your similar end. There is good reason to reflect if only all did the same.
Ponder, you so influenced by fate among the many concerns of the world, so little do you reflect on death. If by chance you glance at this place, stop for the sake of your journey. The more you pause, the more you will progress." So, this is something to think about. And that's the reason why they actually made this chapel of bones, was for people to come in and have this moment of becoming sober. It's a sobering thing. Death is very sobering. It actually separates the real from the unreal. And it strips us of, this veil of, being complacent. And we just live more fully, knowing the fact that every moment that is passing is valuable.
And I guess the whole material energy is so that it makes us complacent. Every single day, it makes us, every moment, we become complacent. We lose our loved ones, or we lose something great. And within a few months or years, people recover from biggest losses. There is a saying in growing up in India that, like, when people go to the cremation ground, then everybody becomes very sober at that time for maybe that hour, a couple of hours when the cremation is going on. It's called Markat Vairagya. Markat means the cremation ground, and Vairagya means detachment. Everybody becomes very detached, and they talk about that. Yeah, I have to also come and die one day, so why should I be involved in so many of these other things? But as soon as people leave that cremation ground and go back home, everybody's back to their doing the same business. And that is the nature of this world. It makes us complacent and forget about that. So we have to make an effort to kind of be aware of what our end is.
This is Tulsi Gabbard, and one of the things she often would say is that when she was in the army deployed in Iraq, there was
in a camp about 40 miles north of Baghdad. Then the first couple of days that we were there in this camp, it was within the Sunni Triangle. It was a time where there were, unfortunately, a lot of casualties. I was figuring out where things were, orienting myself, and I saw at one of the major gates to this camp a huge sign that read in big black letters, "Is today the day?" And I kind of stood there and looked at it for a minute, reflecting on what this meant. And it would continue to serve as a reminder, not just for me, but for all of us who were there, who would go in and out of this gate, who would see it as we went about our business every day, that any day could be the day. About the fragility of life, about the temporary nature of these bodies, and how our time could come at any moment. We had a chaplain there who was from American Samoa, and he would often preach in his sermons, just have faith. If it's your time, it's your time. If it's not your time, it's not your 2005.
And this is a very interesting story about like complacency, how we become so complacent. This is a story of Arjuna's elder brother, Yudhishthir. And there was a situation in which they were very thirsty, and each brother went to fetch some water from this lake, which was controlled by this greater power, Yaksha. And he was invisible. So all the brothers, when they drank the water, they kind of fell unconscious or dead. And when Yudhishthir, the eldest brother, he went because they could not answer some questions this Yaksha was asking. So this Yaksha, he said, I can bring back your brothers to life if you can answer this question. Otherwise, you'll also die if you want the water from this lake. So Yudhishthir said, okay, I'll answer. I will try to answer your question. So one of the questions he asked is that, what is the most surprising thing in this world? This was a question that was asked to Yudhishthira. And Yudhishthira, after thinking about a while, what is the greatest surprise? So one would say, oh, the Taj Mahal or the whatever at that time, that whatever that was. But instead, he gave a very intelligent reply. He says, ahani ahani cha bhutani gachanti yamalayam sheshastavaram icchanti kim ascharyam atapara. Hundreds and thousands of living entities meet death at every moment, but a foolish living being nonetheless thinks himself deathless and does not prepare for death. This is the most wonderful thing in this world.
Yeah, and we see that, like, we never ever think that this is going to happen to me. Even though we hear about it, we're like, okay, I'm going to be.
I still have 20 more years, right?
Yeah, or that I'm going to be here forever. That's how we live our life. I mean, there's so many people, they just never prepare for it, thinking that nothing is going to change, and then it suddenly happens. This is another example that is given in our Bhakti text, a little bit strong, but nevertheless, it kind of cuts through that veil of complacency, where there are these goats that are just standing in a slaughterhouse, and as one is being taken away, the others are just munching on some grass on the side, thinking that I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm munching on my grass. My grass is here.
My
grass is green.
Yeah, and I never see what's happening. So this is living in this awareness. But somebody could say, well, if I live in this awareness, we've already gone through this.
Yeah, but here the point is that this person is being chased by death in the form of elephant. He's hanging upside down, and he can drop down any moment in this valley of snakes. But he's just happy licking the honey that is dripping from this.
And he's thinking life is good.
Life is good.
So, somebody could say, well, this is a very this would make me a very morose person. But again and again, the Bhakti text described that actually this would not lead us to a place of being morose. It would actually lead us to a place of being fearless and completely happy and blissful. So there are three features of death that are described. So for someone who is completely unaware, right? Someone who doesn't want to even contemplate the idea of death, death comes as an axe.
Krishna says that I appear as death. Somebody who's, it appears as a cruel death for somebody who doesn't believe in.
Yeah, and you can see it's a pretty fearsome, image where, it's you feel that you're being chopped off, right? But the yogis, on the other hand, these great yogis who practice through their entire life and engage in the practice of Ashtanga Yoga, Hatha Yoga, they are actually able to use death as a vehicle. What that means is that they're able to fix their mind on a certain destination and ascend their life air through the different chakras, bring it to the head, and then go to whatever destination that they would like to go to.
So they use death as a vehicle or as a tool to elevate themselves. And the final way to look at death is an embrace. And this is for a person practicing bhakti. They see death as an embrace with the Supreme Divine, rather than losing all we have. It's gaining all we could gain as a final embrace.
Death just simply becomes a gateway through which we step over and we find our beloved waiting on the other side, waiting to embrace us. So in that way, one is never afraid.
Fearful.
One is never fearful.
Rather, one is eager.
One is eager.
One is eager.
So this is another story, where, there is a sage who's walking down a city, path, and he meets different people and he gives different blessings to them. So the first person he meets is a prince who's obviously very rich and has all the opulence of this world. So he says that, may you live long, may you live very, very long.
He says, Rajaputra Chiram Jiva. Chiram means live forever. And then next he meets a celibate monk student who is completely dedicated to his spiritual practices. And to him, he gives the blessing, Ma Jiva, which means better you just die right now. And it may sound like a curse, that why is the student or the teacher, why did you curse him? He said, no, I didn't curse him.
We'll come back to the unpacking.
Oh no, we'll unpack
as we go. Also, then the first one we didn't unpack.
Okay. So let's do the unpacking.
Yeah.
Come back. So he says you just die right now. So you guys can think why he said that.
And then he sees a saintly person and he says Jiva va marava, which means that whether you live or you die, it doesn't really matter.
And then he meets this butcher and he gives him this blessing that Ma Jiva Ma Mara. You don't live or you don't die.
Okay, so the first one is the prince, why did he say to the prince that you should live forever? Because he is living a life of great material happiness. And in this life, he's not doing anything to earn a better, destination. So it's better he has a long life, because in the next life, he doesn't know what he's going to be. And then
the celibate monk, he tells him, better you die right now, because the celibate monk is completely free from any sins, and he has lived his life in complete dedication to God under his teacher's guidance, and so he's free to go now. There is no purpose for him to continue his life longer. He's already perfected in that stage, so he's ready to go.
And a saintly person is someone that is, is already liberated in this body. And so to him, there's no difference whether he dies or he leaves. It's the same thing. And this is a person that is, on the path of bhakti. This one, on the previous one, is actually in the path of, Ashtanga yoga, because he's performing so many austerities. So life is hard. So it's better if he leaves, then, he's going to gain the benefit of his austerities. And then the butcher.
And the butcher, you neither live nor die, because neither live means you're living a life of such a cruelty. So it's better for you not to live. But then don't die, which means that there's so much reaction karma waiting for you because of the cruelty that you committed. So it's better that you don't die, because then you have to face those consequences. So anyways, just focusing on death and the reaction that is waiting for us. What are the destinations after that? So death can be seen in two ways. It's in the jaw. One can perceive death as like the cruel jaws of death, or death can be perceived being in the lap of mother.
So there's a little, an analogy that is often used is of that of a cat. So cat actually carries a mouse in her mouth. And when she carries a mouse, the mouse actually thinks or feels that he's literally in the jaws of death, right? But the same cat also carries her little baby kitten in her mouth. But the kitten actually feels that obviously she's being carried in the mouth of her mother, right? So the same experience is different for a rat versus a little kitten.
And I guess the point is that death is going to come, but I guess how we prepare for death and how we perceive death is going to be different. So for a practitioner of spirituality in any tradition, death is like in the lap of mother. Yes, you're being carried into the lap of the mother, embrace of the mother. So understanding death and preparing for it, again, Krishna says that death is just a change of body. We move on to another body, just like we're changing bodies in this life. We just change body into another life. So a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. I guess that is the main point Krishna is making, that we prepare for it, we understand it, and then we will not be bewildered by death or any kind of loss in our life.
Actually, Prabhupada also says that, life is a preparation and death is the exam. And so, so this whole preparation that we are doing is actually meant for us to be not bewildered at the time of our departure, of our departure and the departure of others also. And this is how we can test our own progress in the process of spiritual life. It will not be affected. So
anyways, this is a little bit more detailed facts. So we think of death as one thing or the final thing, but the Bhagavad Purana describes actually 5 kinds of death or 5 kinds of annihilation. So even sleep is kind of described as a death. It's like a mini death. Every time we go to sleep, we kind of almost leave the body, and because we have experiences of so many different scenarios in the dreams, we are kind of left, and then we come back in the morning
because we forget that who am I, who are my family members. We forget everything that we have. We just go in a state of complete forgetfulness. The only difference is that the subtle body returns back to this gross body. So when we go to sleep, the subtle body, so the gross body is lying on the bed, but the subtle body has gone somewhere else. But the difference is that when morning comes, the subtle body re-enters back into the same body, and that we call waking up. But in death, what happens is that the subtle body leaves, doesn't come back. That's death.
And death is death, as we know. The body is burnt, and the Yuga transition, which is like the Kali Yuga, Sati Yuga, Dwapar Yuga, Treta Yuga. When there's a transition, there is a death. Brahma's night is also considered another death. And finally, the end of the universe is considered another death. So anyways,
These are, yeah, we can, maybe in the
trying-
queue, yeah, if you're interested.
so this is a very interesting story, again, focusing on death. There was a king who had 4 wives, and uh, one day he just wanted to test them, and he asked them this question: hey, I'm about to die in the next whatever number of days. So which one of you will come with me? So he asked his 4th wife, whom he gave the most attention. He bought her the maximum, the most expensive gifts, and always kept her very, very happy, and really took really good care of her. And when he asked her the question, she said, "There's no way I'm coming with you."
She said, at the most, I can just come to the cremation ground.
Yeah, no, that was the 3rd one.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first, she said, no, just forget about it.
Ah,
Don't even think about it. Then I'm going to
Right,
come
right.
with you into the next life.
right, right.
And then the 2nd wife, and then the 3rd wife, who was also very, very supportive of her, supportive of him, took care of him in times of need and all that. And he asked her that, okay, what will you do?
Will you come with me?
Yeah,
She said, at the most, I can come to the cremation ground.
at the most I can come to your funeral.
Funeral.
That's, and the third, and the 2nd one, he also put a lot of heart in her, and took care of her in a very, very nice way.
And then her response was, well, after you die, I'm going to just get married to someone else
And then go away.
and go away. And then the first one that he had actually.
And then he was really shocked by this time, and like all 3 wives just kind of really giving that response. He was really shocked and heartbroken. And then he hears a voice from the first wife, whom he had completely neglected and never took care of her. And she said, I'll come with you. I'll wherever you go, I'll come with you and be with you.
So I guess to unpack the story, which is really an allegory, it's the 4th wife represents the body, which we take such good care of, and yet, the time of death, the body doesn't come with us, right? It completely betrays us.
The 3rd wife, who said, okay, I can only come to the funeral ground, that represents the family, friends, or relatives, whoever. They want, the maximum they can come is up to the funeral ground.
And beyond that, they don't accompany us. The 2nd one is actually all our property, our wealth, our assets, and as soon as we die, it belongs to someone else. Right. In fact, even before a person dies, the family members are watching over it and thinking, okay, this person goes, I get everything.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the last, most neglected wife is the soul, basically. And then the soul says, okay, I'll come with you, which means that the soul is the one that actually goes. So
and the one that we neglect.
that we neglect the most. So only if the king had reversed the priorities, and he would die as a happy person, and fearless.
So these are the death wishes of Alexander the Great. So his first wish was, my first wish is to have my physician bring my coffin home alone. My second wish is to scatter the gold, silver, and gems from my treasure house along the path to the tomb. And
then the last one, very astounding. My final wish is to put my hands outside the coffin. And I guess it's very heartening to learn about his wishes. Looks like he was a wise person to have these kind of wishes. And I guess the first wish kind of, he wanted to declare to the world that even with the best of technology, best of health, best of doctors, he could not be saved. And his own physician bringing his coffin home alone, kind of, he wanted to prove that nobody can save you when the time of death comes.
And I guess the second one is that we can't take even a little, the smallest thing that we may possess, we cannot take it with us. So he had so much wealth, and he's just saying, okay, just scatter all that along the path so that people can see that none of this is actually going to, go with you. And then the final is that, putting the hands outside the coffin means that, my hands were empty when I came into this world, and as I'm dying, my hands are still empty. There's nothing I'm able to carry with me.
So I guess this is very fascinating how they were actually able to teach a gorilla that it will die one day. So I guess if a gorilla can be taught, then we also have hope. Okay. Maybe I didn't share the sound. Let me just, I think probably I made that mistake. Just give me
Oh,
one
really?
second. Yeah, let me share the sound.
No, we can hear the sound, Prabhuji.
Okay.
But you share it anyways.
Okay, then it will be louder.
Yeah.
Scientists at Tulane University's Primate Research Center announced they have taught a gorilla that someday it will die. Nate Meredith has more in the lab report.
Thanks, Dan. In an historic first, a team of primatologists has succeeded in teaching Quigley, a western lowland gorilla, the concept of mortality and inevitable doom. Lana Burrows and Philip Townsend are the researchers leading the project.
When we first started with Quigley, he was just a normal, happy ape, not a care in the world.
The first thing we did was we taught him patterns like
Right.
red block, blue block, green block over and over. Then it became a pattern of gorilla born, gorilla grow, gorilla die over and over.
Right.
The researchers then showed Quigley photographs of dead and dying gorillas while communicating the phrases "you someday" and "no choice."
It took thousands of repetitions, but Quigley finally became cognizant of the correlation between himself and a decomposing pile of hair and flesh in the photo.
Quigley shared his feelings in a confessional after completing each exercise.
That was a great moment.
Quigley also began painting pictures like these almost every day. To make sure Quigley retains the awareness of his own demise, the team spends several hours per day reinforcing the certainty of death's arrival.
Quigley, you die. You will die soon.
The researchers say at first Quigley could only communicate rudimentary fears about his own death, but he soon moved on to express more complex emotions like indifference and self-hatred. And just 2 days ago, Philip Townsend and his colleagues even witnessed what they believe to have been a panic attack in Quigley.
He was letting out these anguished cries and banging his head against the wall, and I just thought, we did it.
The Tulane scientists believe that we may be able to teach a gorilla to resort to alcoholism or even try to kill itself in as little as a decade. The scientists next plan to test whether the results with Quigley can be replicated with other species. They are.
Anyways, I guess I was just thinking that they were able to teach the gorilla that he will die, but it's so harder to teach ourselves.
Yeah.
Even though we know so much, but still it's hard to convince ourselves that we'll die one day.
In the initial.
So again, as we talked about, death is a doorway to these 4 destinations. Bhagavad Gita talks about the first destination is the highest destination is to the spiritual world. We can prepare for death in such a way that we actually go to the spiritual world. And that is the whole purpose of human existence, is to take that doorway.
So to the extent that we're able to focus our consciousness on the Supreme Divine, and that's why we are practicing mantra meditation every day, is to prepare our consciousness so we can remember Krishna at the time of death, and then that way we enter into the spiritual dimension. But even if we do not, if we have other desires, then we actually have the opportunity to enter into other planets. Some of these planets have better standards of living.
And these are material planets.
These are all material planets. So sometimes in many traditions, we talk about heaven, for example. So according to the Bhakti understanding, heaven is just a higher planet, but still within the material sphere. It's still, it's described that these higher planets have maybe even higher standards of living, longer lifespans, more enjoyment, but they're still very much within the material realm.
Which means even there, somebody has to die.
Eventually.
Eventually.
And then the human.
And then the third one is the human, where, okay, that's, if we act in such a way, we can come back as a human being, because there's no guarantee we can come back as a human being. Human birth is very, very rare and very special. So even to get back a human birth is a great achievement.
It is, and that is determined actually, for one thing, when we practice bhakti, or we, engage in this daily meditation on the sacred sound, then it is described that a human body, Krishna speaks that to Arjuna, a human body is guaranteed for such a person.
Even if you don't perfect our
Even if
spiritual
you don't
practice.
perfect it. And then the fourth one is the lower species, which is actually quite binding for the soul, because now the soul has to enter into the animal body and a lot plant body, and a lot of the freedom is actually taken away, because now as an animal, one is just responding through instinct, and one cannot really make conscious, rational choices or decisions. And so that's why the lower species is actually a step down. And it's something that then the living entity is forced to go through the countless 8.4 million species and then come back into the human body.
Because once we can enjoy what we want, but then if you end up in a lower species, then at that point, we cannot choose to come back to a human species. And then we are kind of forced to just drag along in that cycle of evolution. which is very painful. So I guess that's why Bhagavad Gita constantly implores that take advantage of this human life, this 70, 80, 90 years that you have, make good use of them so that you don't have to go down.
And that's, something to think about, that sometimes, and I have definitely thought about that. There are some people who are so like filthy rich, and their life is like, when you look at their life, you go, okay, they're really like living like a king, but then what happens after they die? Where are they going after this? And that's one way to look at it. The other way I was thinking was that sometimes we have great enmity between different nations, and we may hate the other country who's our neighboring country, and we just, like we could kill them. But that any kind of obsession or any kind of absorption in anything can lead us back into that same place. Like the whole process of dying and taking birth again, it's so mystical, so mysterious, that I may really hate, my neighbor, and I may, because of my absorption, I may land up back into that family, the one that I hate so much.
Yeah, and Prabhupada also gave the example of like a miser who was so like, he was very wealthy, but very, very miserly, never gave charity or never helped anybody. And he lived his life just guarding his property. And Prabhupada said that such a person may very well come back as a rat in the same house, or as a dog who's kind of guarding that property, and his own son may come and kick the dog. Hey, go away, go away. Why are you sitting here in front of the house? So some cruel but real reminders. So we again talked about this, the death destinations, whatever consciousness we cultivate, and whatever, that's the same consciousness we'll have at the time of death. So at the time of death, one cannot say, okay, I'm just going to think of God at the time of death, but the rest of the life one just lives in whatever way they want. It's not going to happen. Just like for any kind of exam, you have to prepare for it. We just can't show up.
It's kind of like when we're driving, when suddenly a car comes in front of us, we immediately put our feet on the brakes, right? It's a reflex. We don't think about it. So when we practice bhakti, it becomes part of our subconscious response, and it just comes out, because at the time of dying, our body is in a state of disarray. Everything is kind of breaking down, and for us to be able to make a conscious effort at that point to try to remember would be very hard. But if you have practiced, then it will be very natural. It will happen naturally, and that's what we are.
And therefore, Krishna says in this text 8.5, he says, "Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna. At the same time, carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt." I guess that's the key in throughout our life, in whatever activities we are doing, taking care of family, our work, or whatever, fixing our mind and intelligence of Krishna. So once we have that lifelong practice, then remembering Krishna at the time of death will become just a natural consequence. This is again showing, this is another story in Bhagavad Purana, by the way, it's filled with stories of dealing with death and what happens after death. So this is a story of a great king who was very advanced in bhakti, and he left his home and went to the forest to focus on his spiritual practice. But somehow or other, he got attached to a deer, a calf of a deer, and he kind of got diverted from his practices and fully fixed his consciousness on this deer. And what happens is, lo and behold, at the time of his death, he's just thinking about this deer. So what happens, because he's thinking about the deer, he is born as a deer in his next life. But because of his bhakti practice, Krishna allows him to remember the mistake he made. So as a deer, he recognized that, hey, I made a big mistake. And so he spends that particular life as a deer, just again preparing for the next life. And the next life he's born as a spiritually advanced person, very, very, and in this life he came with a conviction that I'm not going to engage with this world. And so he focuses inwards and completely dedicates his life to serving and remembering Krishna, and then he goes back to the spiritual world after that. But the point is that our consciousness determines our next destination.
So this is a question to ponder about. And, we found out that actually there's an experiment that has been done, because we always talked about it and we saw an experiment, which is that if our house was burning, what would you save? Right. So, the example is that, when the body is actually on the brink of death, the body is also on fire.
Like a house on fire.
Like a house on fire. So when a person's house is on fire, then you just grab the thing that is dearest to oneself, the closest that is to oneself, and then one will just run out of it. So same way, when it's time for us to die, whatever we have held on to throughout the duration of our life is what we are going to run out with. And there is no second, we can't just sit there and make a list of pros and cons or think, okay, maybe this, maybe that. It's going to be the most natural thing for us to do. So this is an experiment apparently that was done, a challenge, a burning house challenge. I don't think we need to watch this, do we? So you can watch this on your own time, but this is an experiment that was done. And these are different, people are
different
responding.
Members of the family are responding with different things they want to carry.
So it's something to think about for ourselves, what would we carry?
Yeah. And this is an important question that Arjuna asked in 6th chapter, that, hey, Krishna, what happens if somebody doesn't complete their practice or life destinations of an unsuccessful yogi? And so Krishna answers that if you are not able to practice, then there's no loss in the path of bhakti. Depending on our progress, we'll either be born in a rich family or in a family of practicing yogis or advanced yogis, where we can just pick up where we left. Our consciousness will be kind of carried over, and then we'll continue with our progress. So nothing will be lost, because there is a fear that, hey, if I practice something but I don't finish and I die, then what happens? And Krishna guarantees that whatever progress we make in our spiritual journey, that will be preserved to the next life, and will continue until we reach the final destination.
So looks like there are some death cafes that are springing up, which I think is a great idea, where people actually come together and they just sit together and they talk about this. And, should we watch?
While death is a fundamental and inevitable part of life, should we start dealing with it more openly? Death cafes offer an innovative take. They're informal gatherings where people discuss issues and death and life over cake and tea. And more than 900 have been held across the world within the last few years. So let's talk now to John Underwood, who is the founder of the Death Cafe franchise. John, thanks so much for being with us. Why did you come up with this idea of having a place for people to come and have tea and cake and talk about death?
Well, I just think that kind of thing should be available. I think talking about death is a very normal thing to do. I know most people don't want to, but for those of us that do want to do that, there should be a safe space in which to do so.
So you personally felt that there was nowhere for you to go, that you could safely talk about these issues?
Absolutely, it was something I wanted myself. And then I read about the work of a Swiss sociologist called Bernard Kretaz, who established something called Café Mortel in Switzerland in 2002. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, I want to do that too.
It's become hugely popular. I mean, are you surprised by the fact that the idea has taken off around the world?
Yes, I mean, it is surprising, but it's really wonderful, and I think it signifies that things are changing very, very quickly.
So anyways, and this is another concept that Dola, this person, is training people to die well. And so as we can see that this idea is taking root, that we should talk about that. We should prepare for it.
And bhakti is actually the perfect death coach. The process of bhakti, the process of being around devotees, and the practicing. A practitioner of bhakti actually is always meditating on this.
How am I going to die?
How am I going to die?
What my consciousness will be at the time of death.
And preparing for that. And I guess the idea is this the last slide?
No.
The idea, of course, being that, we want to die before dying. I think we made a reference to that. So unpacking that a little bit more, for myself, I always think of having my bags ready to go, right? That whatever business, unfinished business, whatever, one of the things I really try to put into practice is not to leave loose ends, whatever, to live life as though I may leave tomorrow. And what does that mean? It would mean that I would forgive much more easily. I would make peace with my life, with my past, much more easily. It just changes our whole perspective. Things that need to be said, not to leave it for tomorrow, but to say it, both to oneself and to those that we love, and just living a life of freedom. It frees us. It frees us from so much unnecessary baggage, because we realize when we have to pack for a long journey, then we immediately start thinking of what is it that I want to take in my bag, especially when there's a weight limit.
Yeah.
Right. And then, when we have to die, really, there is really nothing much that we can carry other than our consciousness. And then we start thinking, okay, what can I really carry? Like Alexander, he could not carry any of his wealth. Then we start thinking about the real wealth that we can carry, which to a practicing devotee is the accumulation of the sacred names. that is what one will carry. And that is what, not just that is what one will carry, but that is
the only thing that will carry you.
That is the only thing that will carry us. And so that way one becomes very aware of what's important and what's essential and what's non-essential.
And I guess resolving all our emotional or whatever our karmic baggage is, because if you are angry with someone, or if you hate something, or whatever those negative things, they will force us to be born back to resolve those things again.
Yeah, and I guess I was also thinking that so much of the pain of death is actually, part of it is physical, but a huge part of it is also our emotional clinging on, holding on. And we've seen that. Like I was just talking to a friend and who's, one of her parents is about to depart, and she says that she's just not ready to let go. Like we're telling her that it's okay, you can leave now. But, there's just so much of holding on, and that causes so much pain. It's hard to lose one thing in our life. And death is basically the loss of everything that we think we own. And so to the extent that we have practiced living consciously, to that extent, an example that comes to my mind, which is very helpful, is, I don't know if you've seen a coconut. And so, coconut, when it is green, you shake it, the cream inside and the water inside, it's all mixed together. There's no separation. But as the coconut dries out, at some point, on the outside, it still looks like it's the same coconut, but on the inside, that cream has now become like a separate,
thick layer
of coconut, and it's actually completely separated from the outer hard shell. And when you shake it, you can actually hear that this inner shell is actually separate from the outer hard shell. So same thing for a practitioner of bhakti, the body and the subtle body, they actually become separated, right? Now you're no longer identifying with either the gross body or the subtle body. So
the soul is kind of separated.
The soul is actually separated.
So this is the goal of any yoga practice or any spiritual practice, is Ante Narayana Smriti. Ante means at the end of life. Narayana, which is another name for Krishna. Smriti means to remember. So the goal of any spiritual practice is to remember God at the time of death. So this is a verse from Bhagavad Purana which says, the highest perfection of human life achieved either by complete knowledge of matter and spirit, which is Sankhya Yoga, by practice of mystic powers, which is Ashtanga Yoga, or by perfect discharge of occupational duty, which is Varnashrama, is to remember the personality of God at the time of death. So no matter what practice you do, the test of that practice is, are you able to remember God at the time of death? If you have achieved that practice is perfect. Otherwise, whatever practice it may be, it's not good. It's not sufficient, because the goal is this. That's how we can judge a particular practice.
I think we can skip this.
Yeah, this is another story given in the Bhagavad Purana, centered around remembering God at the time of death. This Brahmana somehow is able to remember God at the time of death, and that kind of saves him from going to another material body. So this is, wanted to share this. What you may ask that, hey, can you show us an example of some bhakti practitioner, how it helped them to achieve this God consciousness at the time of death? So we witnessed this great example in our own life. In 2005, we had this great bhakti monk. His name was Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and he became a disciple of Prabhupada at a very early age and completely dedicated his life to Krishna consciousness and serving. And back in 2004, he somehow prayed that may all the world's karma and the pain, he can bear that, and people can be freed from that karma. And lo and behold, I guess Krishna kind of listened to his prayer for whatever reason, and he was diagnosed with
melanoma cancer. And he went through this, and he was actually, while he was going through that, we actually got
both his legs were amputated, had to be amputated.
And we actually got to see him give classes, and we saw him, pretty much till the very end, of his life. We were able to witness his wonderful example of departure. And at that time, he actually had one request from Radhanath Swami, who many of you might actually have heard his name. And he said that my only request is that if you can be there with me as I'm going through my departure. So Radhanath Swami stayed with him. And at one point, like, the doctors were amazed, because this is such a painful form of cancer. And he looked at Radhanath Swami, he grabbed his hand and he said, it cannot get any better than this.
And he was in excruciating pain. But still in that pain, he would complete his 16 rounds of chanting. And it would take him 4, 5, 6 hours, but he would not give up. He would complete his chanting and he'd carry on every single day. We encourage you to watch this.
It was about 10 years ago. I was with one of my very dearest friends and godbrothers. His name was Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He was an African American who was born in the ghettos of Cleveland at a time in the 1950s and 60s where if you're born in the ghetto, it's a 95% chance that you will live and die in the poverty of the ghetto. The Constitution spoke of civil rights, but the country did not offer civil rights to minorities. But he was incredible, so positive. He never lost hope. He had such faith in God and such a will to do good for others.
Anyway, Tirtha Swami was a remarkable Swami. He traveled around the world. He shared Krishna consciousness with some of the biggest leaders of the world like Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela. And he was personal friends with all of them. And he was such a powerhouse of energy. We had the blessing of meeting him and even inviting him to our house. Such a powerful example of dedication to Krishna. And you could see from his ending that how he was able to achieve the perfect end of remembering Krishna and dying in such glorious consciousness that is otherwise it's humanly not possible.
Yeah, his kirtans, his lectures.
We have a lecture. This is, by the way, this is the last kirtan that he did.
This is, I think, right before he left.
Yeah, after a few days he left his body, and just to see his consciousness. I just want to bring.
Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai. Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Sham. Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Sham. Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Sham. Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Sham, Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Radhe. Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai Radhe. Jai Jai Radhe, Jai Jai.
Actually, on a similar note, there's another devotee here in Mayapur, and his name is Jai Pataka Swami. And he is right out of the pages of these ancient bhakti texts because, you know, he had a stroke, I think, what, 10 years ago?
In 2005.
2005.
17 years.
17 years. And he's been like at any given time.
He's kind of paralyzed in different parts of his body.
He had a stroke, he cannot speak properly, and he's had liver transplant, kidney transplant. He's in and out of the ICU at any given time. He's had COVID a few times. And he knows next thing we hear is that he's in the ICU and he's battling for life. And then 10 days later, we find out that he's on a world tour. Right. He was just in the US, this last week.
Yeah.
And
he came back to Mayapur. Yesterday they celebrated his birthday.
So it's like he's gone completely past the confines of his physical mortal body. And even though, it's not so easy to deal with one liver transplant, and he's at that, and then a kidney transplant, and who knows what else,
Yeah, he's kind of fighting in the face of death. It's almost like he's kind of, death doesn't matter.
Death doesn't matter, yeah. And This is a beautiful prayer, a beautiful poetry where a king actually prays that, "Oh Krishna, please allow my mind to immediately yield to your lotus flower-like feet, just as the flamingo enters into the labyrinth of the lotus flower stems. When at the moment of my last breath, my throat becomes constricted by the action of the bodily humors, air, bile, and phlegm, how will I be able to remember you?"
So this king is a devotee, a great devotee of Krishna, and in his prime of his youth, he's offering this prayer to Krishna that, hey, let me leave my body right now in this perfect consciousness, because I can't wait. I don't know what will happen at the time of death. So Prabhupada used to sing this prayer, and you guys can also. Should I sing this?
No. Yeah.
So again, somebody may ask that what may happen to us if I die in a situation where I cannot remember Krishna at the time of death. So, or maybe I'm some medical situation where I'm not perfectly able to remember Krishna. So no loss. Krishna says it's not like if we are dedicated our life to remembering Krishna throughout our life, then Krishna says, I'll remember you at the time of death. So he'll take care of this. And this is confirmed in this Bhagavad Purana, also in this Varaha Purana verse, that if my devotee is unable to remember me at the time of death because of disturbances felt within the body, then I shall remember my devotee and bring him back to my supreme abode. So it's not just like one-sided. Krishna is also very eager to bring us back, and he guarantees that. So just wanted to end with this final kind of video. Is Prabhupada, he teaches by his own example how to leave this body. And Prabhupada spent his life serving Krishna, and at the time of death, you can see how he's completely emaciated. He stopped eating and drinking for many weeks before this, and this is the final few moments. And at the last moment also, he's actually translating the Bhagavad Purana into English. This was his lifelong service, and he's still doing his service even at the time of death. This is the last purport he dictated.
If we enter in devotional service, we get a different nature. And in this, in the business of sense gratification, we get
and then karma is tad dehopalabdhi hetu.
Yeah. And according to the association of different nature, we get a body. Karanam gunasammasya satasat janmajini. Therefore, we should always seek good association, devotee association. Then on life will be successful.
So you can watch this full video.
So between 1968 and 1977, Srila Prabhupada dictated a total of 22,000 pages of text, or 6 pages of text every single day.
And he would wake up at from 12 midnight. He would take a nap from 10 p.m. to 12 p.m. 12 a.m. And then at 12 a.m. he would wake up and spend the whole night actually translating and dictating this text.
And he did that up to the last moment of his life.
Last moment.
Such clarity,
Yeah.
right? So guess we'll.
So you can watch this whole video at your. So anyways, we concluded our 5th session. What is death? Preparing for it, the art of dying. Different destinations. It's not random, and then we have control over our destination based on how we engage our life, and then the final embrace, the preparation for it. When we prepare for it, then Krishna will make it available for us. And the next session will be talking about this material world. This is another big topic of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna spends quite a bit of time explaining what this material world is. What are the different forces, the 3 modes of nature that we talked about: goodness, passion, and ignorance. They will be discussed in great detail in this session, because this is what we're dealing with. This is what we have at hand, is dealing with these 3 forces, which drive us and in every possible way, and how to become free from these forces. So that will be the subject of our next session. So please join us. most of you have already joined the Mighty Network. Please follow us on our Instagram page at Bhakti Points. And any questions, you can send us an email. So that ends our session on death. And we'll take any comments, questions, realizations, corrections. And Aditi can help us with that.
Yeah, there are a few questions here people have been asking. So the first question here is from Victoria. She's asking, would you please expand on chapter 10, text 34? I'll read the text.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Chapter 10, text 34. I am all devouring death, and I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. Among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. And it's the second part that starts with among women, I am fame that Victoria is asking about.
Yeah, Krishna is saying that feminine. These are the qualities that are considered feminine. Not feminine in the sense that I don't know how to explain it.
So Krishna is saying that in this section, he's saying that he is the best of the best. So whatever we see, which is beautiful and which is perfect, then he says, I am that. That opulence actually comes from me. And he's saying that for whatever reason, and we don't really know why, but he's just saying that women, the intelligence of women, the fine speech, the what else is there? Steadfastness, all of these patience, all these qualities. He's saying that that those qualities actually come from us. Comes from Krishna.
And he attributes them to be feminine quality.
Yeah, and also I was also thinking that in Sanskrit, sometimes like there are certain things that are considered to be masculine in nature,
like gender. Like when we're studying grammar, and then certain things are masculine, certain things are feminine, certain things are in between, neutral gender. And
sometimes it's hard to know like exactly why something is being called as feminine, right? The same thing happens in Hindi.
Yeah.
So why exactly those things are considered to be feminine is I don't know, but he's saying that these are things that come from me. I don't know if that helps at all, Victoria. Yeah.
There are more questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the next question is from Jess Twinkletoes. What are your thoughts on euthanasia?
So the thing is that karma, again going back to the discussion of karma, life, which includes birth and death, are actually not in our hands. And whenever we try to play with that in any way, then it could lead to, like, say if so the reason why a certain person is suffering in a certain body, as we have understood from our last discussion, is because of some karma. So if I try to artificially terminate that karma and say, well, I'm just going to terminate, and in this way I will be able to end the suffering, is actually not a valid proposition, because that suffering, that karmic suffering that was due to me in that particular body, will then get transferred to the next body.
And probably in an increased amount.
So that's why, we allow nature to take her own course. But there is a way that, great personalities have done that, which is that they go, when a person knows that it's time for him or her to leave, then actually abstaining from food and water is actually considered to be a non-karmic, in fact, a very glorious way to leave. So like with Maharaj Parikshit, when he finds out that he has to die in 7 days, instead of trying to artificially prolong it, he just goes on a fast, and he just fasts from water and food. And then this way, he just naturally leaves his body.
Same thing with the example Bhakti Tirtha Swami was showing you. He the last few days, he completely gave up food and water. And Prabhupada also did the same thing. And then focusing, and I think the positive is to focus one's consciousness on God, and completely dedicate one's consciousness on God. So.
And one can do that at any moment. There's a story of, what's the name of this person in Bhagavatam, who inquires from the great, demigods, how much lifespan do I have? Katwanga. And he says, and then he finds out that he only actually has a moment to live. And so then he utilizes that moment, and he says, all right, I'm just going to focus completely. So, so in that one moment, he actually perfects his life.
Go ahead, Aditi.
The next question is from Christina R. If someone dies without last rites or is unconscious, can our prayers help them after passing?
Definitely. Definitely. Prayers are always very powerful. Prayer, what is prayer? Prayer is basically we are requesting God to intervene, and Krishna can intervene on our behalf for anybody. And there are so many documented cases of prayers having a positive effect on somebody far away from them. Even unknown people have been benefited. The God, the Evidence is a book where you can read more about the power of prayer, documented power of prayer.
Called God, the Evidence?
Yes.
The next question is from Canella, and it's on verse 6 in chapter 8. The verse is, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. And Canella wants to know, does it also pertain to sleep?
Like if you die in sleep?
Like if you, actually that's a good clarification, Canella. I don't know if you mean like when you go to sleep and you.
So there was mention that like the subtle body leaves the physical body when you sleep, but then it comes back and then you wake up. So, I mean, it's not specifically talking about death, but I just wondered if like how you go to sleep, because there was a conversation that came up in a previous session we had this week about like how you go to sleep. And because there's some level of disassociation, subtle and physical, that happens when you sleep, I wondered if there's some philosophy or belief that goes with that, like how you go to sleep at night.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think our consciousness, in general, no, I've never heard of anything, but in general, a practitioner of bhakti always tries to keep his or her consciousness, you know, in check, you know, constantly keeping the mind absorbed. So before sleeping, like reading something about Krishna or chanting, or, you know, or you know, sleeping with this intention that I'm going to wake up this coming morning to again revive my spiritual practices, keeps the consciousness in that place of spiritual focus. But you know, nothing to like exact, you know, that okay, this is what we do in order to, it's just a daily practice that allows our consciousness to just naturally drift. One thing we will notice as we engage in spiritual practices, bhakti practices, is that our consciousness will become more and more clear, and our dreams will actually change. That, you know, the dreams that we may have had previously, which are an indication of somewhat of an indication of our consciousness, will start to change. It'll become much more peaceful, and will become much more hopefully focused on Krishna.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. And now there's an anonymous question. What about wishing death on someone who wronged me? I feel bad having these thoughts. Sometimes I share this with a friend. I feel like every time I wish death on this individual, that I bring that wish of death upon myself. How can I deal with wishing death to someone, even in the privacy of my mind?
Yeah, that's basically when we have that kind of a desire for somebody, it means an entanglement. It means a great karmic entanglement, and anger. Looks like there is anger there, hatred is there, and some feeling of revenge is there. So Krishna says in the 5th chapter that when we want to leave this world, we want to leave this world free from anger, lust, and all these other attachment and fear. Because if we have those feelings, then we'll be forced to come back, and we don't want that. So if we have those feelings for somebody, it's better to release them through forgiveness. Contemplate on our own death. What do I want to carry? Do I want to carry this these negative emotions and be born again.
And then have to deal with that same person.
Have to deal with the same person, maybe even in a more intense manner.
Yeah. So freeing that is actually letting the person go.
Yeah.
Because you know, I mean, one thing is for sure that a person who has actually been toxic or has hurt us, we don't perhaps want to see that person again in our next life.
Yeah.
So the best way to do that is to finish it off in this lifetime itself, to unentangle that and say, all right, I release you, and I forgive you, and I reclaim myself. And then we just make peace with that. And that way, our karmic, and the best way to do that, by the way, is actually through the process of chanting. I found that myself personally also, that it automatically unentangles all of these different knots. These are, in the Bhagavad Purana, there's a word that is described as called the hard knot of material life. So the heart actually becomes entangled in this hardened knot.
So it gets
twisted
to two ways. Either we are positively attached to somebody, like we can't live without somebody, and we are so attached, we can't even imagine how will I live when I leave this person. That is a positive attachment. Negative attachment is to anger, hate, revenge, and those kind of feelings. And that is even more intense. So we don't want either of those attachments to fester in our heart.
And death is definitely not, not a sufficient for a person who has been in any way perpetrator or abusive or harmed us in any way. Death is not the final revenge. There's a lot letting karma do its work. So and the karma is there. There's no running away from that. So when we let go and we don't try to be the dispenser of that karma, and we let karma itself work itself out, then we become free from that. And in fact, we don't generate a new cycle of karma,
because the tables might be switched. And because of that attachment, we may come, both of us may come in the next life, the switch tables. Then what will we do? Then it just keeps going back and forth, and then we never free ourselves. So best is to let it go. Although it may be hard, but we can ask Krishna's help in that situation.
Yeah.
Krishna, I have this feeling of anger and whatever. Please help me. I want to fill my heart with you rather than with these feelings of these negative feelings for anybody else.
And Jennifer, I like your response. You can pray for those that do harm to yourself or others. Pray that they find compassion in their own hearts. Absolutely.
That's the next level, is to actually be able to pray for them. Sometimes it may be hard to do that, but if you can do that, that's really makes us very dear in the heart of Krishna.
Like your comment also, Canella, death is coming. No need to spend time wishing. Yeah. Hope that helps. Go ahead, Aditi.
These are all the questions that I've noted down. There were some others that were answered in the chat. And so maybe people who have their hands raised, I think Heidi had raised their hand first. So if you want to go ahead and unmute.
By the way, I just wanted to, I think I saw a comment there. I just wanted to respond to that real quick, that I do think that even that gorilla's video was kind of cruel. And it just, because it just leaves that, with half, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to die, but then what? It's like, it just doesn't take it to the next level. Right.
Yeah.
So anyways, yes, Heidi.
Hello, thank you so much for doing this. And I have a cheerful death story. I am a death doula and a registered nurse, and I take care of people who are actively dying, and I sit vigil for them. And I also take care of people who are planning their end of life because they are at end of life circumstances. And just today, I was helping the man clear out his books to give away to the library, and I found a book about the Upanishads with beautiful photographs and beautiful sayings. And I read a few of them out loud, and I said, I'm going to read these to you as you're going. So it was kind of cool to find the Upanishads. So I saved it for him, and it's not going to the library until he dies, and then somebody else can have it.
Oh, that's
beautiful. That's so good to know that you're doing this wonderful service for people.
Yeah.
I've been a registered nurse for 30 years, and this is the best part of my entire nursing career. It is.
So would you like to maybe share with us something, Heidi, from your own experience, like based on what we discussed today and the Bhagavad Gita perspective? We'd love to hear from you, your thoughts and realization on this topic.
Oh, you had a very, very nice presentation, and you had some very good YouTubes, and everybody should watch them in their full length. And I took a 100-hour course to be certified, and we met, we came across a lot of those kind of educational things. But I think the best part is to know that you can be consciously, you can be conscious when you're dying. Not necessarily that you're awake, but you can be, you don't have to be attached to the suffering part. And the people that got that, that ability to not be attached to the suffering part of their end of life, they went this, they transitioned with the greatest ease and peace. And I mean, there's so much peace around there, unless people are fighting. If they're fighting for their life, they die fighting, which is, and usually those aren't the people that ask to have a death doula come for end of life. It's usually the people who are a little bit more at peace. So, but it's ineffably tender as the last week or so is passing. And you definitely have the sense of the others coming from the other side, like 3 or 4, maybe 5 days before they go. There's a presence that is sensed in deep meditation that you can sense, and I can see also the gathering. First, is for me, it starts like curtains, or or curtains around the person, and then they start to take shape, and I can actually see people that are coming down, and it is all love. It is just total love. Sometimes there's humor, sometimes they're, come on, and then as the soul passes, they all go in this big huge party of like, I'm so glad you got here. It is the exact opposite of birth, when the baby pops out and they're caught by loving arms, the parents, the whoever's there. And the same thing with death. You pop out of this body and you drop into the arms of everybody who's waiting for you on the other side. And it is just so beautiful. They're just like so happy that you're back. And I mean, I've seen it many times, and it's just so touching. And that, I mean, that's my story.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Aditi.
The next person, Saida, if you want to unmute.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having this topic. I'm not somebody who thinks about death very often. Definitely not like Heidi, who works, her occupation is a normal occurrence. There was something you said earlier, one of you said earlier, about our consciousness and what we acquire in this lifetime. As we evolve, we get to take into the next life. And I was really excited to hear that, because I am somebody who is awakened to spirit. I've made that connection, and I'm moving through this life very consciously. I'm healing. I don't know all the time what's my karma and what part of what I'm experiencing is my soul contract to help other people with their karma. All I know is that I want to gather as much good karma as possible moving into the next life. So 2 questions. The first one is, when people are unconscious, they're still very much asleep, and they're continuing to inflict harm, whether purposely or unconsciously, onto others, and then say at the very end of their life, they have this aha moment where their last thought is, like in Christianity, when they say you ask Jesus into your heart, you ask God for forgiveness. How much of that act absolves you of what you're going to get in the next life, versus all that time, all the decades you spent harming people, whether it's energetically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically, And then in that very last moment, you just say, oh, I'm sorry, God. And then you're given a pass. Like, what happens? So that's my first question.
Well, it's not, there's one of the, to engage in acts of a violation on the strength of, spiritual knowledge is actually, it does not give us that free pass.
And I guess, yeah, there is no free pass. I
There's
mean,
no
of
free
course,
pass.
I mean, it's a good thing that they at least realize at the time of death, but they still have to pay for it. It's not a free pass. They have to,
because so there are two things that are going on. Even if I recognize that the acts that I've committed have been harmful, but there is a seed, and I think we talked about this in our discussion on karma. There is a particular seed that it deposits within the heart, that seed of that proclivity. Just by our saying or confessing that I have done this does not absolve us of that seed, that tendency to do that act again. So there is going to be a karmic purification that has to happen in order for that seed to actually be completely removed from the heart. So that's one part. But then the second part is also in the system of karmic justice. One has to, unless and until one really seriously, I guess there's a mood of contrition and there's a mood of surrender. One cannot just, it's not just a simple sorry.
Yeah.
Or like in India, sometimes people say, well, I'm just going to go take a dip in the Ganga, come back out, do the same thing again, and then I'm absolved. It's not, it's not like that. It's deeper than that.
Okay, and then my second question, I'll be a little bit more brief for this one. So if you resolved what you believe is your soul contract with this a person in this life, and you've made peace with it, but on their end, you realize like they haven't done their part, and you're like, I don't want to encounter this person in my next life. Are you still beholden to that? No. Or is it they're going to have to experience that with someone else?
Yeah, it's not. It's in your hands. If you have released that person from your side, then you're free.
You're free.
They will find somebody else if they haven't released it. Krishna will send somebody else.
Yeah. Our freedom is, in fact, there's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam that says that for one who surrenders and engages in acts of bhakti, all their obligations to family, friends, society, all kinds of obligations, that person is completely released from it. He has no more obligations left.
So you're not stuck in a soul family of some kind?
No, not according to the Bhagavad Purana. No, it is, and this is what Krishna is saying. Actually, one of the last verses of the Bhagavad Gita says that if you just simply surrender, I will release you from all these karmic reactions. He says, do not fear, you'll be completely free. So this is actually what we are trying to do. And we have seen that in our own life, actually, as we have practiced, things that seemed a little sticky, sticky relationships.
Or impossible to get out of. They just sort of fall off. And they're like, it's almost like you can actually physically, you can tell that entire karmic entanglement is gone because the sting is gone. That sting is completely gone. And then if there's no sting, then your consciousness is not, is not hooked there. There's no more hook.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Really like that. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu.
May all beings be happy and free. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Aditi.
Oh, those are all the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else has any other thoughts, comments on that? What it means to you?
I was going to make sure no one else had any questions. A third question. So now that I've gotten to this point in my soul's evolution, and I feel more appreciative and grateful for my life, for my temple, my body, my experiences, and I kind of feel like I didn't take full advantage of how awesome. You kind of, for a while, you focus on the negative, the hardships, the challenges, the traumas, the drama. And then when you come out of that, you're like, okay, there was a lot of other things that were so great. How do you go about asking the universe to, how much say do we have in the next life to have some of these opportunities again? now that we're more conscious, we can take more advantage of it, because there's so much that I feel like, oh man, I know I still have a lot of life left, but I feel like I didn't really live it to the first part as awesome as I could have.
Just your consciousness of desiring that, you're already guaranteed that. Krishna he guarantees that this is, he likes his students or his devotees to succeed. So it's not designed for failure, it's designed for success. And even a little bit of, that's why Krishna says in the 2nd chapter, 40th verse, that even a tiny bit of advancement on this path frees us from all kinds of fear. So we are guaranteed a situation in the next life where we can just pick up where we left, and even a better situation.
And I guess to your question about our desires, like if you have a certain desire, especially through the practice of bhakti, then those desires actually start manifesting very easily. Those are the easier part. But what is actually of more importance is to purify those desires. Sometimes, we ourselves, we don't know the desires that what we really want, So Krishna actually works with us and shows us that, okay, is this desire really of substance? Is this really what you want? And if we do indeed want that, it's described that Krishna will give it to us. And sometimes if it's a material desire, then he'll give it to us in such a way that we will not desire that anymore. Or it'll purify us and we'll get to a point where we'll realize that, hey, actually, Krishna, through all of it, what I really wanted was you. And I was just looking for, something else, which I thought would substitute. And there's a story like that in the Bhagavad Purana, where there is this boy who goes seeking revenge, actually, on that same topic. He gets insulted, and he's a young boy in a warrior blood. And so he feels very angry. And so he approaches his mother and says, I want to take revenge. And the mother says, the only person that can help you is Vishnu. You go to him. So then he goes and he performs his great austerity with just a sole purpose, that I should get a kingdom which is greater than my grandfather, because he wants to show that, okay, I am no less. So he goes there with a sense of revenge. And by the time he's completed his spiritual practice, he's completely purified of this desire for revenge. And then when Krishna finally appears, he says, I don't want anything. He says, I came looking for broken pieces of glass and I found the real diamond now. I don't want this. So
the story of Dhruva, you can read it. King Dhruva. I'll just type it.
Yeah.
Danta, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My daughter, she's 8, and she has been surrounded by death like her whole life. People dying around her like pets. And I've been trying to do a positive thing about it. We're trying to celebrate death because she's a child. I don't want that to bring her, sadness. But also I do believe in celebrating death. So I guess my question is, do y'all recommend any mantras or any verses that I can read and do with her to better help her understand that? She's very smart, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that we've always done, and we've actually been conducting even sessions with children, and we find that children are actually some of the best, we kind of sometimes tend to underestimate their intelligence, but they're actually very, very sharp, and they understand the subject matter right away. It's like almost intuitive for them. And when they understand it, it actually makes them, it fortifies them. Because I remember when I was growing up, I had so many questions around this topic. And I would naturally gravitate towards movies that talked about, death or dying, but I didn't have any answers. But, our son, on the other hand, he grew up and he would ask these very, very difficult questions, and we would, respond to him in a very honest manner, and we would have discussions around it. And I think it leads them, it makes them much stronger. So reading the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, you can read from the 2nd chapter, you can read to her and discuss with her from 2.11 through 2.30. Those are the verses on the soul, and that will give her real strength, and that will help her to deal with the world in a completely different way. Her school, so many challenges they face at school.
Yeah, it'll really help. And I guess to also always, whenever we talk about this subject matter, it should always accompany our strong meditation practice, because otherwise it can be a little overwhelming, or it can be like, okay, am I really ready to talk about this? But what the chanting does is it actually makes us, it carries us, it protects us. It's like the warm embrace. And then that way,
and it also gives us realized knowledge.
It gives us realized knowledge. So doing the two together, that, we read from these books and then discuss it. And at the same time, exposing her to these spiritual chants, spiritual vibration will give her the strength to be able to process it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
I had a thought, because so this is a very heavy conversation, and I don't know, like I think to myself sometimes, like there's this saying that I love that just says like no one ever regretted going to heaven. It's us that suffer, like us who are in our bodies. So for me, like it's not really like how you die, it's how do you live knowing that you're gonna die. you know what I mean? So I guess I just I've just been so grateful. I pray constantly, because I was talking earlier today and thinking to myself, because I got a promotion at my job, and it's more status and it's more money, but it's just more problems. It's just been like the most bittersweet like stuff. And I said to myself, like, did I want this? Did I ask for this? Because it's not better. Like in any way, it's not better. Like life is just full of issues. And so I have just kind of resolved myself to just thank you, God, thank you, Krishna, thank you, Jesus, that I don't have to live without you. Because I feel like living without Krishna is the sad story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, like, what else do you have? There's a scripture in the Bible that I come back to a lot. It just says, who do I have in heaven but you? And the earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but the Lord is my strength and my portion forever. And, I come back to that so much, like, this life is just so temporary. And the more you try to run from it, the more you're just reminded of it. And the only real enjoyment that I find in life is that whatever my dharma is, whatever Krishna has for me, that I can fulfill that. Like, I don't want to die with potential in me, with purpose in me. And I'm not going to be perfect at it, but it's like, how do you live? And I think that is the most rewarding part of this path, is that it teaches you how to live. Knowing that you're gonna die. So I'm sorry to be emotional, but it's, I'm just so happy that I don't have to go through life alone.
That's beautiful, Canela.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, and that's true. I've often thought about that myself, that it's so hard to go through life and to go through death without having this shelter. And that's why, the practice of bhakti has a very strong component of also the sharing of bhakti, because that way, it's amazing how a little bit, and I think mentioned it a couple of times, I saw my father just leave. And I was stunned, because he was not a serious practitioner, but he had inquisitiveness, he inquired. And just that understanding, right, coupled with, intermittent practices, we saw both Loka and we saw him leave, and his consciousness was so clear, and it was so filled with gratitude, and so without any holding on. And we were just really appreciating that how even a little bit of this knowledge can actually save us from some of the most difficult times of our life.
Yes.
So, thank you. All right. If anyone else, do you want to take more? So we welcome you to come for our Q&A and our daily meditation, where we are chanting every day together.
9 a.m. Eastern. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning.